right now, Chelsea Gardner will be speaking about negotiating the pedagogy for students and professors working particularly as teaching assistants.
No, not really.
Okay, so
You'll hear all about it as a volunteer.
Oh, okay, all right. So Chelsea is pursuing her PhD in classics with a specialization in classical archaeology at the University of British Columbia. Her research focuses on cultural identity in the Mani Peninsula of southern Greece. She's the founder and one of the project managers of From Stone to Screen and has worked on the database and content management for the project. So please help me welcome Chelsea.
Thank you. So as you can see, the list of the authors is a little bit different on the screen than it is in the program, and this is a more accurate reflection of who put the most work in. And so the reason that I'm standing here today is because I live in Toronto, really. That's the only reason that I'm here and they're not. We're all graduate students at the University of British Columbia. Emma Hlliard is a second-year master's student in Latin. Katie Frankson is going into, she just finished her undergrad and she'll be starting her master's this fall in ancient cultural and ethnicity in the Mediterranean world. And Lisa Tweten is just finishing her master's in the same program. And I'm a PhD candidate, which is just, so we're all graduate students. And I just happen to live here, so I want to give all of the credit to them. They put together this presentation, they put together the bulk of the text, and I want to stay faithful to their ideas and to the presentation that they put together. So unfortunately, I'm going to be reading it, which I know is not ideal, but I have my little iPad here that I will have to read off of so that I make sure that I honor all of the work that they've done. Our website is on the screen there, and so is our Twitter handle, should you want to check it out while I'm presenting, telling you about all of these things. Okay, so here we go. Graduate students play several roles in their day-to-day lives. We can go from being students in a seminar to teaching an undergraduate class in the same afternoon. Transitioning from student to lecturer has unintended but valuable consequences. It provides a unique perspective on learning and makes us keenly aware of pedagogical issues we might otherwise never appreciate even when starting our own careers as professors. This is one of the reasons my colleagues and I were so excited to have the opportunity to contribute to classroom teaching and learning when we were put in charge of our department's artifact collection, seen here on the slide, which at the time comprised 24 Near Eastern objects and a collection of over 1,000 epigraphic squeezes. So that's what you're seeing on the bottom of the screen there, and an epigraphic squeeze is basically just a filter paper impression of an ancient stone inscription. We'll get back to that later. The acquisition of these collections and the freedom we had to implement these resources as we saw fit gave us a chance to tackle the pedagogical issues involved with introducing primary sources and artifacts to undergraduate classes in language, history, and archaeology courses in a way that was meaningful and that would potentially inspire students to continue on in these respective fields. So let me back up and provide a little bit of background to the project. In the spring of 2012, our department artifact collections, which up until that point had sat in a cardboard box in storage, were brought to my attention. I saw considerable potential in these collections and was determined to create accessible, usable digital resources and teaching collections that would enhance the learning experience of students, not just in our department, but around the world. This was when From Stone to Screen, a project developed and run by graduate students, was born. All of us had recently completed undergraduate programs in various fields of antiquity, primarily classics and archaeology, at schools throughout the United States and Canada. And so we were all keenly aware of the types of curriculum for the study of the ancient world that were typically offered at the undergraduate level. As an archaeologist, I can tell you one of the most frustrating things for students of classical archaeology is the lack of physical material that we have access to in our day-to-day studies. Studying cultures that are at least 1,500 years old presents challenges in itself. But when these cultures are on a completely different continent, separated by an ocean, these challenges are amplified. Archaeology students at UBC are lucky. We have access to the Museum of Anthropology on campus for free as students, and a select few in certain departments have access to the Laboratory of Archaeology, which allows students to see artifacts firsthand and perhaps even work with them. This is uncommon though. The average classic student only sees Greek or Roman artifacts if they visit a museum or travel to Europe. Plainly, it is relatively rare for undergraduate courses to to provide students with the chance to handle, engage with, and interact directly with primary source material, particularly at the introductory level. My colleagues and I have seen how difficult it is to interest new students in the actions and thoughts of those who lived 2 millennia ago, especially when the majority of our textbooks and material sources are themselves decades old. For today's fast-paced, technology-obsessed generation, of which we are members, I will admit, this discrepancy is decidedly difficult to breach. In terms of pedagogical applications, our primary goals were to create digital teaching collections that address this gap and that inspired students to see that the ancient world still has much to be discovered. The fact that our teaching collections comprise fragile, irreplaceable, and, well, ancient artifacts meant that physically and nonchalantly handing them around a classroom was a risky venture. We are particularly hesitant with our squeeze collections, which consist of paper items, like that fragment you see there, and these can easily rip, tear, be spilled on, of course. And these squeezes themselves that we have in our collections are between 50 and 70 years old themselves. And they are, again, as you can see in the slide, becoming increasingly brittle. This is just an example. Most of them are in very good condition. This is just to illustrate. So digitizing these artifacts removes any worry that the original item will be damaged, but still provides students an opportunity to interact with antiquity in ways that would be impossible without traveling to the location where the original stone is housed. So in our case, mostly museums in Athens. Over the last 3 years, the From Stone to Screen team, has worked tirelessly to create digital archives of all of our squeezes and artifacts. This is an example of our Omeka-based website that hosts our artifact collections. In this short time, our teaching collections have grown exponentially, and we've received a new donation of over 200 artifacts from Bahrain, dated from 5000 BCE to 600 CE, and a Roman coin collection from Dr. O.J. Todd, Professor Emeritus at UBC. We're currently digitizing both of those collections. So this is just, again, a screenshot from the artifact website, which is linked from our main website that I gave you the address at the very beginning, so just from stonetoscreen.com. And so these are digital exhibits. It's very much in beta form, but all 3 of them are there and navigable resources for anybody who wishes to access them. So the process of digitizing and creating meaningful metadata for each item in our 4 collections has been and continues to be a vital task that consumes many of our resources. We have been fortunate enough to receive a great deal of support from our department and from our university in the form of the Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund. This funding has allowed us to create paid positions for our student project members and provides real-world, hands-on experience with digitization, coding, and database management, which are increasingly important tools for new graduates and scholars in the field of digital humanities. In 3 years, From Stone to Screen has grown from a core group of 7 UBC graduate students in 2012 to a dedicated team of professors, graduate, and undergraduate students working in both paid and volunteer positions, from Otago University in New Zealand to Yale University to Turkey to right here in Toronto. At last count, we have almost 30 people working on various aspects of this project, collecting data on our Bahrain collection, translating the cuneiform tablets in our library collection, creating teaching modules, and searching for funding so we can provide paid positions, travel to conferences, and purchase the tools to digitize and properly house our collections. Yet one of our goals has always been to incorporate these materials into the classroom. And while we've been presenting From Stone to Screen's work to undergraduate classes since the project's inception, the past year has seen us rolling out various pilot projects to help clarify what we wanted to offer to both our students and professors in the form of pedagogical support and resources. So today I want to talk about a few of these initial exploratory lectures, and finally to share a sample teaching module that we developed just this summer, which shows a full implementation of how our squeeze collection can be used to bring these ancient inscriptions off the stone and into the classroom. So any of our lectures on From Stone to Screen generally begins with a broad introduction to epigraphy and our squeeze collection. As I mentioned before, and I'll reiterate here for convenience, a squeeze is a paper copy of an ancient stone inscription. Squeezes are valuable for research as they make the inscriptions portable when the original is out of reach by creating an exact replica of the inscription, of the words that are on the inscription. In some cases, the squeeze can even highlight details that are not immediately visible on the original inscription due to discoloration or dirt on the stone itself. A squeeze is made by using a damp piece of filter paper, just like you used in chemistry class, that covers the inscription, and a stiff horsehair brush to pound the paper into the grooves in the stone. The horsehair brush is actually angled backwards, and there's one man in Greece that still makes them. But yeah, essentially it's the horsehair that prevents the paper from ripping, and that's why we use horsehair brushes. So squeeze making, however, is actually, to a point, it can be damaging to the stone itself. So a lot of museums, namely the Athens Epigraphical Museum, they've limited the amount of squeezes that you are allowed to take on stones, and most of the stones housed in the Athens Epigraphic Museum, you are not allowed to take any more squeezes. So they have just issued a ban on any further squeezes. This actually makes our collection that much more valuable, because chances are a lot of these stones, the squeezes that we have of them right now and the squeezes that exist elsewhere in the world of these stones are likely the only squeezes that will exist from here on out of those inscriptions, just because they've been squeezed. I don't know if I can use that. Sure. They've been squeezed so many times that they are afraid that they're actually going to damage the letters. Taking squeezes is still something that field archaeologists do. In my active field work, when we find an inscription, we still do this. It's just limited for inscriptions that have been a little bit, they've been loved too much. They've been squeezed too much. So once this paper is dry, you basically peel it off the inscription and you have a perfect mirror copy of it. So these are great resources, but of little value when they only sit in storage unseen and unused. Digitizing the squeezes seemed the most appropriate means of turning these fragile items into a stable, permanent pedagogical tool. One of our major concerns going into this was whether we would be able to effectively reproduce the 3D quality of the squeeze. We needed to find a non-destructive process that would generate crisp, detailed images that retained the 3D nature of the letters. Luckily, UBC has a world-class digitizing center as part of its library called Digital Initiatives, whose mandate is to digitize library holdings so they are both preserved in digital format and accessible to students at the click of a button. The digitization experts at Digital Initiatives normally work with 2D items, so books, letters, maps, magazines, things like that. So even with their experience, our squeezes presented a bit of a challenge. In the summer of 2013, Digital Initiatives assistants Leslie Field and Chris Pugh worked with a small sample of our squeezes to work out how to properly photograph them so the inscription was clearly legible. Using raking light and image composite software to enhance the shadows and highlights, they were able to create a workflow that creates stunning images, fully capturing the 3D nature of the squeeze. And all of our processes have been fully published online, so our process can be easily replicated by anybody who is interested. And what you're seeing there is basically the TTI reprographic machine. It's actually a vacuum table, so it lightly sucks down the squeeze because a lot of them are very undulating and been in drawers for 50 years. And so there's an aerial camera that's mounted there. The lights provide the shadows on the little letters themselves, and we basically take 3 frames or 3 images, an overexposed, an underexposed, and a regularly exposed image, and then just merge them. And it has worked very, very well. And there's some of the images from our squeezes. In some case, the digitized squeeze is actually easier to read than the original, since the high quality photos, there's our original there, since the high quality photos mean it can be enlarged quite a bit while remaining legible. So those are the letters after the photographic process. Squeezes in epigraphy are especially exciting for our field because they offer a solution to a difficult problem. How do we provide a more interactive means for our students to engage with primary source material? Think back on some of your favorite classes in high school. Your art teacher might have shown you a DVD of Un Chien Andalou, your Spanish teacher a telenovela, first-year biology students might dissect a frog in a lab. But what options are available for students who are just beginning to learn about the ancient world? particularly at the introductory level, a critical moment in securing the interest of future scholars and teachers in the field. Participating in an archaeological dig is an unparalleled opportunity, but extremely expensive and time-consuming. Maps and glossy pictures of the Parthenon in a history book are wonderful resources, but can only go so far. What can instructors offer students of antiquity that is as close to the ancient experience as possible, something that is both tangible and interactive? One answer lies in epigraphy and the study of ancient inscriptions. Often, introductory ancient Greek and Latin texts for classicists feature artificial passages constructed specifically for instruction. So you'll have artificial sentences that are like a noun, a verb, and an object. So, the sailor gives the roses to the girl. Something like that is a very typical intro-Latin textbook sentence. So while these have the benefit of being directly tailored to the class's skill level, they lack an important aspect of authenticity, as well as the confidence boost translating an actual ancient text could give a budding philologist. For students of classical history and archaeology, particularly those who lack experience in the languages, exposure to primary sources can be even more limited. In our view, this is due in large part to a lack of easily accessible primary epigraphic source material for teachers. Academic work on epigraphy tends to be fairly inaccessible to those who aren't experts in the field, and of course there is a practical concern when it comes to ancient inscriptions. The inscriptions themselves are located on stone stelae in Greece, far beyond the physical and financial reach of many instructors. Our digitization project provides open access digital copies of inscriptions to scholars anywhere in the world, scholars who would otherwise require access to archaeological sites or museum permits to study the original stones. And due to the size of our squeeze collection, which is over 700 unique inscriptions, we are able to isolate texts appropriate to various levels of student learning and build teaching modules around actual ancient texts. So during the 2013-2014 academic year, we began presenting introductory lectures to various classroom environments. The purpose of these lectures was to provide a basic overview of the From Stone to Screen project in its entirety, from the acquisition to the digitization of both the artifact and the squeeze collections. We wanted to gauge the reaction to the project from students in different disciplines, ranging from language, archaeology, history, and religion. In each lecture, we brought in a range of items from the collections, and students were invited to examine and handle them following the lectures. Not surprisingly, this proved to be a very popular aspect of the presentations and provided the students with more context for the subjects they were studying, as well as tangible examples of evidence used to reconstruct our modern understanding of the ancient past. For example, a presentation on the Temple of Athena Nike, which you see here in Athens, this is on the Athenian Acropolis, to an undergraduate class on ancient Greek religion or Greek archaeology is enhanced with the hands-on examination of this epigraphic squeeze. Right there. Why? Because the precise date of this 5th century BCE temple on the Athenian Acropolis depended for a long time not on the archaeological or historical evidence, but on the presence of one letter in that inscription. Specifically, the letter sigma, or our letter S. For many decades, scholars argued that all inscriptions possessing this so-called three-barred sigma could only date to before 440 BCE. The inscription and the temple were thus dated by this inscription that you see here. The inscription talks about the founding of the temple. This controversial dating convention has only recently been rejected in scholarship, and so it is meaningful for students to hear and to see how such a tiny letter had such an enormous impact on the field of Greek archaeology, and incorporating these squeezes in the classroom allows them to actually examine the very letters that created such a debate. So these introductory lectures were ultimately successful, but our long-term goal is to create teaching modules and exercises that allow instructors and professors themselves to use From Stone to Screen material in their classrooms as part of the syllabus or the curriculum. Rather than have representatives of the From Stone to Screen team come into a university classroom and give a lecture that might only be tangentially related to the overall course structure, Our goal is to provide appropriate material so that instructors are able to incorporate epigraphic evidence directly into their lesson plans. As a part of this transition, we are developing short videos that professors can show prior to delving into a hands-on exercise with the primary source material. The purpose of these videos is to provide introductory yet essential information to contextualize the material in our collections without having to rely on a From Stone to Screen member to be present. This streamlines the entire process and ultimately makes it possible for professors outside of UBC to incorporate this material into their lesson plans. The videos are brief yet informative and deal with subjects such as what is a squeeze, which I'll show you in 1 second. All of the videos, this is our pilot video, it's the first one we've done, and we are currently working on a couple more on our collections in general, on the McGregor Squeeze collection, on the Fuller Artifact collection, and basically within the week these will be up and fully downloadable. Well, it's through YouTube, but on the multimedia tab of our webpage. So you guys are all experts on what a squeeze is now, but
what is a squeeze? Part of the From Stone to Screen introductory video series. A squeeze in general refers to a molding or cast of an object made by pressing a pliable substance around or over it. An epigraphic squeeze in particular is the impression of an inscription on stone, like these ancient fragments seen in this photo. An epigraphic squeeze uses filter paper, also pictured here, which is porous but strong paper used for filtering liquids and most often employed in the field of chemistry. The process of creating a squeeze is as follows. First, the filter paper is dampened and placed atop the inscription. Next, a custom horsehair brush is used to hit the paper at the correct angle so that the paper is pressed into the grooves of the stone. The paper is left to dry, and you can see in the photos here how much harder it is to read the original stone's carved words on the left. They already become much more clear with filter paper laid across the letters. Let's see this process in action. Step 1, preparation. Video. A student demonstrates the squeeze making process using an angled brush to drive the paper into the inscription. Although this technique is pretty straightforward, you have to be careful to hit the inscription at just the right angle so the paper doesn't tear. Step 2, removal. Once the paper is dry, it is carefully peeled off. The student here takes his time to make sure he doesn't rip the paper. It doesn't take long for a squeeze to dry in the hot sun, but you still don't want to rip your squeeze and waste your time and your filter paper. The finished product peels off, fully intact, and a mirror copy of the inscription is revealed. But think about this. How easy is it to read mirrored words? These letters are a good example of the words on a squeeze, and they say, so you end up with something like this, which can be very hard to read. But some of our stones might actually look like this and be harder to read, especially with letters missing and no idea what the text said originally. Still, these backwards copies of ancient inscriptions are incredibly valuable tools for research in the field of Greek and Latin epigraphy. When encountered in the field, inscriptions are most commonly located on immovable stones, but squeezes allow scholars and researchers to virtually transport the stone to research institutions worldwide. So even in the 21st century, we are using this simple technology that only requires water, filter paper, a horsehair brush, and of course an inscription, as the best way to study the words carved by ancient people hundreds and even thousands of years ago. From Stone to Screen would like to thank the financial support provided by the Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund and by the Department of Classical, Near Eastern, and Religious Studies at the
So yes, as you can see, this is a pilot, a test one, and we came up with the idea of doing a what is a squeeze video because we had those two clips that we'd taken when we were working in Athens a couple summers ago, but our future videos will have more video in them. The majority of this video is admittedly photos. Does this work? No, that's not. Yes, it is. Okay. Sorry, hold on a second. So, the most obvious starting point for actual classroom implementation of ancient Greek inscriptions are in the Greek language classrooms. In November of last year, we approached Dr. Melissa Funke about the possibility of incorporating a translation of an inscription into her second year ancient Greek language class. This inscription that you see on the slide here was selected for its aesthetic appeal. It is one of our only squeezes that has carved relief imagery so that you can see it in the squeeze and on the original stone itself. As well as the fact that the text of this inscription includes the use of the subjunctive mood of the verb, so if I were you, a grammatical construction that the second year students were currently learning. As an added incentive, the translation of the inscription was to appear on a poster presented at the annual meeting of the Archaeological Institute of America. The poster was entitled From Stone to Screen, Putting the Squeeze on Digital Epigraphy, and it featured the names of the students responsible for the translation. So there's the translation and the names of the students in the classroom. This exercise proved to be ultimately very successful, and the instructor had this to say. It is always a challenge to bring ancient subjects to life in the classroom, doubly so when students are concentrating on mastering the nuances of language. Introducing my intermediate Greek students to the From Stone to Screen project has proved to be an effective and exciting means of solving this problem. Several students remarked that this was especially helpful in making the difficult task of learning Greek seem more concrete. For this group, composed of students pursuing religious studies and archaeology rather than classical philology, it was a means of contextualizing the language that literature had not yet provided for them. Based on the success of this exercise and the students' excitement when working on this project, we have requested more inscriptions to work on for next term and look forward to further collaboration with From Stone to Screen. So the ancient inscriptions used in this classroom were implemented as a part of Real Greek Thursdays, an initiative with which Dr. Funke aims to contextualize and provide meaning to a language spoken thousands of years ago. The hands-on approach to the translation also allowed students to independently use reference tools and resources, and then led to a discussion of topics as broad-ranging as dramatic competitions and the political system in ancient Athens, topics which are typically not broached in the constraints of introductory language textbooks. So we are very pleased to announce that this research and classroom implementation will be able to continue this year, due in large part to the generous funding, as I mentioned in the video, provided by the Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund. Moreover, the Department of Classical Near Eastern and Religious Studies will employ 2 teaching assistants From Stone to Screen, who are researching, or who will this coming academic year, research and compile appropriate squeezes for different levels of Greek language classes, as well as relevant squeezes for interactive exercises for classes on Greek history, Greek archaeology, and Greek epigraphy. So, for example, a first-year student will not be equipped with the tools necessary to translate an ancient inscription. So teaching modules and exercises for the introductory Greek student involve simple inscriptions with lists of names or cities, and the task of the student is only to identify individual letters or vocabulary words, and in some cases to transcribe them. So the value in something like this is that oftentimes when students of ancient Greek language are reading, the texts are transcribed in ancient Greek in lowercase letters. But all inscriptions in ancient Greece are all uppercase letters. So this is a great chance for students to be exposed to different kinds of letter forms and be able to pick them out and recognize them. So for example, we have a sigma here, which in lowercase can look like either of those 2 other sigmas. So it's just getting students used to different kinds of letters. Another one here is the delta. That's a delta, uppercase and lowercase. So really, students would not be exposed to these uppercase letters at all. And then finally, down here we have a gamma, which is interesting and a good example of how different regions in ancient Greece had different dialects and different letter forms. So what you're seeing there are 2 different forms of an uppercase gamma. The middle one actually looked like another letter entirely, like a lambda, and they both look completely different than the lowercase one. So these are the kinds of very simple exercises we're implementing in introductory language classes, like students who are the first week literally just learning the Greek alphabet. These are the kinds of exercises that we're implementing. And this is the epigraphic transcription. So what you're actually seeing on the stone is on the left, and then what they would see in a textbook is what you're seeing on the right. So it is actually quite different except for the uppercase letters. And then of course our English translation down below. It's literally just a list of peoples from different places. A Greek history class, on the other hand, would benefit from the close examination of this squeeze, for example, which bears the 7th century BCE law code of Draco, outlining the first legislation ever written for the city of Athens. Finally, archaeology students are accustomed to seeing images and studying plans of ancient extant monuments, like the Parthenon you see here. But we are rarely exposed to the epigraphic sources which provide contextual evidence for aspects of these buildings which would otherwise be unknown to modern scholars. For example, building accounts, which include the cost and expenses associated with the construction of these buildings, like those you see here, or inventory lists describing the gold riches and spoils which were once housed in places like the Parthenon, but which, unlike the immortal building itself, does not survive today. These spoils, these riches, these gold coins, things like that, don't survive, and the only reason we know about them is from these epigraphic sources. So this summer, our undergraduate and graduate students who were hired through the Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund funding spent a significant amount of time developing new teaching modules for use in the 2015-16 upcoming academic year. And so this is the authors Emma and Katie were our two hires through the Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund, and who were put in charge of not only researching a lot of aspects of these squeezes and updating our database, but they created these modules. I want to spend some time talking about one of these modules. These are projects we are particularly proud of, as they really see the full realization of our initial dream for From Stone to Screen, and they are modules developed for students by students. The example teaching plan we chose for today was developed for an introductory course in ancient Greek history. So, a course for students who potentially have a bit of background in classical studies, but no prerequisites for ancient languages. So this criteria immediately narrowed our search, and we chose the squeeze that we did for several reasons. First, and perhaps most obviously, we chose the squeeze for its clarity, as this particular squeeze is of manageable length and relatively legible, but still cryptic enough to be an enjoyable challenge for the students. Secondly, the pedagogical value of this particular squeeze is not just in the text, but the content. So if any of you are familiar with deciphering Greek letters, you might have gathered that what we're looking at here is actually a record of monetary amounts. More specifically, tributary amounts paid by the allied city-states to the Athenian Empire. So what you're looking at specifically in these images is the digitized image of the squeeze, and then a transcription of parts of it, and that's the assignment. So they've written out, so they don't have to transcribe it themselves, they don't have to figure out what the letters are, that's already done, but they need to figure out what the amount of a parka, and I'll get to what that is in a second, is for each of the communities listed there. So during a period of Athenian hegemony in the 5th century BCE, which was the peak of Athenian power when the Parthenon was built and when Pericles and Aristophanes were wandering the streets, members of the Delian League were made to pay tribute to Athens, and 1/60th of this payment was allocated to Athena, and this was known as the aparkai, or the first fruits. These amounts dedicated to Athena were inscribed on stone stelae set up on the Acropolis. The type of detailed information in this squeeze is a unique benefit offered by the Athenian tribute lists. This is what these squeezes are called, these categories of squeezes. Though literary sources do give us information on the Athenian Empire and tribute collection, the Athenian tribute lists fill in valuable gaps in our knowledge. So for example, how many city-states did Athens enjoy as allies in this period? How much did each city-state pay? How did those amounts vary from year to year? The Athenian tribute lists give us contextual detail on everything, from year-to-year changes in the members of the Delian League to Athens' financial crisis in 325/324 BCE. What initially looks like just a list of numbers actually represents a meaningful record of ancient Greek history, one with several potential discussion points for the classroom. Students are engaging with primary source material that not only gives them a tangible sense of the ancient world, they're deciphering a text that provides a valuable wider context for classical Greek politics and economics. So have you ever wondered what an ancient skilled worker earned in a day, what the equivalent might be in our terms? These are the kinds of questions that get students engaged, guiding them to make pedagogically valuable connections between their own experience and the ancient world. Instead of a teacher presenting a lecture on Greek currency, students have the chance to assess the value of those monetary amounts for themselves. Depending on a teacher's preference for the class, further questions might be posed for discussion, such as, why do you think this particular city-state had to pay more than another? What are the political circumstances that might affect the amount one city has to pay from year to year? Why were certain city-states given an extra amount to pay? Individual research projects can even be assigned, concentrating on the city-states listed here and in other similar squeezes. These projects can further foster understanding of the Mediterranean world in this very complicated period. So, as mentioned already, we have tailored this particular lesson to students who may not have experience with Greek. This exercise only requires some basic knowledge of Greek letters and then knowing the symbols for numbers, which start to take on variations of 5, so it's easier to follow. Actually, I'll go back. Oops. I'll go back to them in case you didn't get a chance to read all about the Greek numerical system. So even the systematic layout of the Athenian tribute list is a lot easier for students to grasp rather than other inscriptions, which are typically written with no spaces between individual words and no punctuation. So again, I'll give you so you can see there, basically even based on what I was saying, you can see the numbers on the left-hand column, they're separated by that larger word in the middle, but the left hand, those are numbers. Those are symbols that represent numbers, as you can see here and as the next slide explained, and there's a gap, there's a space between those numbers and between the names of the city-states. That doesn't exist in other ancient Greek inscriptions. Usually you just have letters with no spaces and nothing else. So you do have to have a significant amount of ancient Greek knowledge to be able to figure out where one word stops and the next begins, and it can be, this is why the field of epigraphy is so small. So, let's go. Okay, so our focus for this introductory lesson is showing both students and instructors that inscriptions can be an accessible pedagogical tool at any level and in a variety of classes, not just higher level epigraphic studies. For the in-class activities, students are asked to divide into small groups to do their best to assess the tribute amounts for this specific fragment of the Athenian tribute list. Depending on the temperament of the class, the teacher might choose to make this into a small competition or simply allow each group to work through the text at their own pace. In this activity, there is less importance placed on whether the students get the answers right or wrong, and more on the experience of interacting directly with an ancient inscription. Group activities tend to foster greater participation, or at least force students to close their laptops and put their phones down for 10 minutes. And the more relaxed atmosphere will give the teacher the opportunity to wander around the room, interacting individually with each group and offering further information on the subject in a more organic way. This activity also benefits students that do not major in classical studies. They learn the value of a primary source and its limitations. How far can we take a primary source before it is exploited? Are scholars capable of doing this? Do we perhaps rely too much on the written word? These questions do not only apply to classics. All students can enhance their critical thinking skills by figuring out where to draw the line when it comes to using a source and recognizing the need to report their findings in a responsible manner. So another exciting avenue we're exploring for the classroom centers on material culture and our ancient artifact collections. Along with our database of squeezes, that is the texts based on the epigraphic inscriptions, we've also created an Omeka website, screenshots featured here, which showcase some of the artifacts I mentioned earlier in this lecture. Right now we have several student volunteers who are working on the bibliographies for these artifacts. And the students that work on these, it's all student volunteer. So they're researching, they're contributing to their CV, this is how we get them motivated. But they're also learning simple things like Omeka and WordPress, which are valuable tools as well. So this is a great opportunity for undergraduate students to dedicate their efforts towards a single object and understand not only how much can be told from one artifact, but also how much research and meticulous cataloging has happened by past archaeologists just to be even able to identify different styles. And for example, the different lamps that we have, different ancient lamps in our collection. As someone who was at that stage only a few years ago, I know that I took for granted the fact that all Roman artifacts had a name and model type and never even considered that it was someone's life's work to separate out centuries of artifacts. And we hope to eventually have extensive bibliographies and descriptions for each of the artifacts and encourage, of course, any student who wishes to research them independently to do so. As for how our artifacts can be used in the classroom, the range of the collection is its best attribute. As I said, the items of the collections date from the ancient Near East through to the modern period. We have Carthaginian lamps, Egyptian amulets, a Roman vaulting tube, medieval Islamic sherds, and of course what we consider to be the jewel of our collection, a cuneiform tablet. It is the best array of artifacts that a classical Near Eastern and religious studies department could hope for. These objects are a little more stable than the squeezes, their fragile paper counterparts, so professors at UBC are welcome to take the artifacts to their lectures and help bring the ancient world alive. What better way to help students understand the everyday lives of those who lived 5,000 years ago than to let them hold this tiny cuneiform tablet in their hands, look at the little scratch marks in a dead language they don't yet understand, and tell them that it's a delivery receipt for sheep and goats. Since it would be difficult and probably a terrible idea to have a lecture-sized class look at the artifacts, it's unlikely that it will be taken to all classes all the time, and this is why we created these digital resources. So, our digitization project provides a resource for teachers and students at all levels around the world, essentially, to access these materials. This is our greatest hope for digitizing the collection, that anyone interested anywhere can work on them. This has already happened with this cuneiform tablet. A PhD student in Assyriology at Yale University, Nicholas Krauss, used our newly scanned images of the tablet and provided us with an updated translation, which is now on our Omeka website. It was a chance for him to work on a new tablet and a chance for us to update our collection. We also have a new artifact collection, the Harvey F. Blackmore collection, which was just donated to the Museum of Anthropology this past year, which features over 200 artifacts from Bahrain. This collection is in the process of being assessed, a collaborative effort between the Museum of Anthropology, our professors and graduate students, and will be featured on our Omeka website as well. So there's still a lot of work to be done and important contextual information we'd like to add to our database, but we've begun concurrently developing ways to implement our newly digitized items into various types of curriculum. It has been of the utmost importance for us to make sure that students of all levels and backgrounds can benefit from our various educational activities. A section of our website will be devoted to full lesson plans, mini lesson plans, and individual activities. Instructors can choose to incorporate the activities and mini lessons into their own lessons, syllabus, curricula, etc. We hope instructors will use our digital archive to develop their own ideas for lesson plans and then share them with us. Ultimately, we hope that our current database will continue to be expanded and developed through direct hands-on learning by students of all levels. Thank you.
So we have a few
Questions? Yes.
I have actually two questions.
Yes.
When at your beginning of the talk, you mentioned that you're using aerial photography. You're taking 3 shots and combining them of your pieces. Do you know you're just blending them, or are you doing the HDR photography out of them?
So this was Lisa Tweten, the other project co-director, was employed by the Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund to develop this photographic technique. And essentially at the beginning, they found it very, very difficult, very, very easy, because it was an option in Photoshop. They tried and they tried and they tried with all of these different photos to get the best thing that they could, and then they realized there's a button in Photoshop that will merge the 3 overexposed, underexposed, and regularly exposed photos, and then the recent update of the software eliminated that option. And so
because it's going to a different direction, that's why I'm asking you, because I was playing with the HDR photography myself.
Yeah.
And the blending modes. The starting point is identical. You have 3 images from -1, 0, +1, and the blending mode just blends them.
Right.
But the HDR photography expands your dynamic range ridiculously and has more tweaking power, which means that you can bring out the details from the 3 shots. You can bring out the details that simple blending will not bring out.
Okay.
It gives you way more options and power how to blend these 3 modes. And even you can take 5 shots and get even more details out at the expense of some noise on your photograph, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But that's why you have this massive sheet that you can tweak the noise, tweak the amount of how much you add your 0, how much you add +1, how much, So you can get a really powerful image with really lots of details. And even if you take 5 photos and merge them HDR differently, you can see different parts popping up. So
No, that's actually great, because the majority of our squeezes in the collection have now been digitized and are available online, but we specifically left aside a couple that were just really damaged, and the letters were they were almost illegible. And we've been thinking about using this academic year in some of our paid positions to play around with things like that. Again, they're squeezes, it's not the original document itself. So it is likely that other better squeezes exist somewhere, and of course we still have the ancient stone. And in some cases we actually have duplicates. So in some cases it doesn't really, it's not crucial to do this, but we do have a couple that we aren't sure what to do with. And these are the exact kind of things that we're gonna be experimenting with this year with our kind of extra ones that haven't been digitized yet. But yeah, no, that's very helpful, the HDR blending. That's
and
great.
the other thing is, if you're dealing with the object instead of squeezes, which are three-dimensional, and your lampshade looks like this on the other side, but it's completely different on the opposite side, do you have a technology to make a 360
So
interactive view of that?
yes, so that is
That
something
would be
else that we
great.
are going to be doing.
That would be great to see, because you have
Yes.
this photo that gives you the dimensions, and then
Of
you can
course.
have the actual object from any angle.
Of course. So we had some of us in the department, well, those of us who are archaeologists, some of us have exposure to 3D modeling, photogrammetry, etc.
Yeah.
So what we're actually doing this year is we're offering a series of instructional skills workshops to anybody, really, undergraduates, graduate students, professors, anybody who's interested in them. And we're doing it as a fundraiser. We're charging $5 per lesson and $50 if you want it, or $20 if you want to do all of them, something like that. But we're being kind of sneaky about it because we're going to start with artifact photography, artifact drawing, then we're going to go to digitization of artifacts, and then 3D modeling. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to assign students or professors or whoever it is at the beginning an artifact from our collections, so that they actually have, like, they see this artifact through all of the process of what digital and artifact recording is in the field of archaeology. But they also provide us at the end with a drawing and a 3D model and a digital drawing. So we will have them up on the, because we just purchased, we upgraded our Omeka from .org to .com, and so we have a couple plugins and SiteGround and things like that that will enable us to actually showcase the 3D model of the
There
object.
actually a few really
And,
simple apps
because we had a late start, we're gonna have to compress this. So if you guys can just stop later and do it on your own.
Sure.
Yeah, but please join me in thanking Chelsea.
Thank you.